ahead and get started. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. All right. Excellent. Hi, I'm David Zyla, and I'd like to welcome you to our Knack at Home series. This is produced by the National Arts Club, and if you're not familiar with the National Arts Club, it was started in 1898 in New York City, and its mission is to educate the American people in the arts. There is a clubhouse on Gramercy Park in New York City where events take place most evenings of the week, and we invite you to join us there. But during this special time, we have migrated online. And so we are doing a series of these. And if you go to the National Arts Club website, you can see a whole listing on our calendar of upcoming Knack at Home events. So please join us there. So today we have with us Katie Irish. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Katie Irish is a costume designer best known for her work on the award-winning FX series, The Americans. She began as a shopper for the first season of the show, became assistant designer for seasons 2 and 3, and then took the helm as designer for seasons 4 through 6. The final season of The Americans took home both the Best Drama Awards for both the Emmy and the Critics' Choice. Prior to her work on The Americans, Irish designed the indie features The Widowers and Landing Up. She co-designed the season 10 semifinals and finale of NBC's America's Got Talent, shopped for HBO's Deadwood, and served as the New York design assistant for the Muppets Wizard of Oz. She has also designed numerous commercials, short films, and music videos. Earlier in her career, she worked extensively as an associate designer on Broadway, where favorites included Jesus Christ Superstar, Godspell, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, Jerusalem, Fences, Promises, Promises, The Seagull, Is He Dead, and Shrek. Originally from Memphis, Katie is an alum of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts with an MFA in design for stage and film. She is currently working on a new project for Netflix. Katie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I think if anyone knows costume, I think it's you. So in 1 hour, you're going to tell us absolutely everything about costume, I'm hoping. So would you, I want to talk about your career in just a little bit, but for those that are less familiar with it, would you talk about, how does one costume design?
Well, the first thing I do is I read a script, and I will read a script a lot of times, not just because the scripts will change as we're going through the process, but the first time I read a script, I just want to read it. Just like if you're reading a novel, you read it the first time, and you just want to understand who the players are and what's going on. After you're not worried about how many people there are or, the actual plot, what happens. I go back through, and this is where I have my different color highlighters and pens, and I begin taking notes about where I think the day breaks happen, so that way people can change clothes for continuity days. I begin to notate, I'm like, oh, there's a fight sequence here. This is gonna mean I need multiple whatever they're wearing. And I begin to take other notes about character. I have, you mentioned, a background in theater, and so the text is always really important to me. And so anytime another character says something about a character, or we see them behaving in a certain way that tells me something about who this person is, I make a note of it, so that way I can begin to understand these characters as real fleshed out people instead of just words on a page.
Wow, so you're really like a detective looking for clues that will create a visual.
Exactly.
Wonderful, wonderful. You mentioned receiving a script and starting with the text, and that is similar to theater, right? Mm-hmm. Like that is that's how theater is designed. When you get that first script, do you immediately, like let's say a television series and you're reading the pilot episode, do you immediately get like a flash of God, I see this character and I know they shop at this store, or I know that they, I don't know, have this type of handbag or whatever it is. Do you get kind of like these immediate like flashes, ideas, like I must have her wear this type of ring, or is it, or is it a little bit different? Is it more like, how would I say, a gradual build, or just curious?
Oftentimes it depends on the character, and it depends on the writing, and if I immediately identify with the writing, or if it takes me a little more work to get into it and to understand who the character is. Yes, there have absolutely been moments where I look at it on the page, I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly who this person is. I do know where they shop. I know what, if it's a man, I know, does he wear boxers or briefs? Like, I know these things immediately about the character. But the thing that I like to remind myself is that, yes, I'm creating the character, but at the end of the day, it is not a drawing that I'm doing. It's going to be a person on screen. And so for me, equally as important is the person who's going to be wearing and embodying this character. And so I always have ideas going into a fitting about what this person is and who they are and what they would wear. But I also really value the input and collaboration of the actor involved, talking to me about their ideas. Sometimes if it depends on the size of the part, sometimes they're like, whatever you want, it's fine. I don't have any big feelings on how clerk number 4 needs to be portrayed. But,
Maybe
especially
like clerks 1 through 3, I don't know.
yes, exactly. But, if it's a larger role, the actors have been doing their own preparation and have their own ideas. And so it really, again, much like theater, it is a conversation about, these are my ideas, these are your ideas. Let's see where they cross over, and let's figure out how to marry them in a way that works for everybody.
Lovely. And you talk about the collaboration with an actor. A question I have for you is, do you ever, read the script, get an idea of the character, and you get the casting, and you look at the photo and go, that's not Maria, or that's not John, or whoever, because it's so different from like your first reaction of reading about the character? What is the recalibration?
Oftentimes, if it really is jarring to me, either through age or type, or they've taken a character that was written as a woman and made it a man, or vice versa, what I will do is I will call the director of the episode who cast the person and say, hey, what was it about this person that really drew you in for the role? And so that way I understand what that actor brought to it that they responded to. And then I try and build on that for the character. But yes, that happens often, where you just look and you're like, this is not who I thought you were going to be. Okay.
That is a brilliant solve. Wow. Because, you're quote unquote not seeing it somehow.
Right.
And you're like, okay, what did you see? That's absolutely wonderful. So speaking of the director, when would you talk a little bit about, I think we all know that in theater it's really a director's medium, and the director is giving input on, no, I think the chorus should not be in gold, or whatever. And you work directly with them, and it's really their how would I say, it's a collaboration, but it's ultimately their vision. And they're pulling all the elements of, the music, the dance, the script, the look, all of it together. How would you tell us about how it works in television or film?
Well, television and film, I think, operate differently, because I think that film is much closer to theater in that it is the director's vision, and kind of all roads lead back to the director for approvals, for kind of the keeping of the visual aesthetic and making sure that it is unified across all of the people working on a production. Television is very different, because in episodic television, oftentimes you'll have a different director for each episode, or you have one director who does 2 episodes, depending on how you're shooting. But usually that person does not know the characters often as well as you do, because they're concerned with what their episode is. They don't necessarily know about what's happened in the past, and they may not have scripts about what's happening in the future to this character. And so I don't want to make it sound like the directors aren't interested in the characters, because that's absolutely not true. But they just may not have all the information about them that I have had, because I've been in the meetings for so long about and all of that kind of thing. So in television, we have people called showrunners. And these are the people who created the show, who worked with the writer's room, and you're usually the head writers. And they are the ones who are kind of the keepers of the universe. And they are the people who will know that, yes, this is right for that, or no, this isn't right for that. And so it's often a conversation between the director, the showrunner or runners, as well as the director of photography and the production designer. Because the director of photography can tell us how he or she is planning on framing shots, what is important or not, and often can start to dictate a style that the show will look like. And the production designer is very important, in addition to just being, a massive collaborator, in making sure that the world feels cohesive, that my characters feel like they are part of their home. Like if they're meant to be out of place, why are they out of place? Is it because of something they're wearing and it's visually jarring in color? Or is it somebody who loves the color purple and they have a purple couch and they have a purple jacket, and it's that kind of thing. You do get that with your set designer and your lighting designer and your director in theater, but it's just a little bit different in episodic television.
Thank you for sharing all of that, all those details. And have you gotten to do the purple person yet?
I haven't done the purple
Not
person yet, but
okay,
I'm sure he or she is out there.
Tell us a little bit about, obviously when you are the designer of the show, the clothes are your vision. How does your team, what is your team, A, and B, how does your team work with you, and what are their various responsibilities in costuming, specifically for television?
My team is massive, honestly. It takes a lot of people to be able to work at the speed that we work on television shows. There are 2 different departments that most people think come together as one. There is costume and there is wardrobe. And now costume are the people who handle all of the creative side of it, the planning, the going to all of the meetings to figure out who the characters are, doing the fittings, and making sure that all the clothes are fit, tailored, built, however you're creating the characters, and put together and ready to go before we shoot. The wardrobe team takes over when you're shooting. They are the people who are responsible for continuity, which is a huge responsibility. They are the people who are responsible for the clothes being worn in the way that I want them to be worn. So if I want someone very neatly pressed and put together, they are responsible for that. Or if I want someone to look like they picked their clothes up dirty off the floor, they're responsible for making sure they're appropriately rumpled. And they are the people who do the long hours on a Friday night, who come to work at 4 p.m. and leave at 6 a.m. Whereas the costume team is, as I said, we're more in the prepping side of it. I bridge both sides in that I am on set, but I am not actually involved with the prepping of the clothing after it's been created. That is the wardrobe supervisor's job. And so the wardrobe supervisor and I work very closely together. The wardrobe supervisor will do a script breakdown, and which involves going through and telling me which characters are in which scenes and how many looks based on the script he or she thinks that each character has. Then I go through my script and my notes, and we compare notes and say like, no, I don't think they change here, or, you know, that kind of thing, to come up with this final list. But then the wardrobe supervisor takes that list and uses it for all of the continuity. So we get the call sheet each evening, and the supervisor says, okay, so we're doing scene 77 tomorrow. We need, you know, numbers 1, 4, and 8, and it's changed 2 for number 1, and that kind of thing. So it's a very detailed job. And now
So for those that go into show business for the glamour, you're offering a slightly different take on it, yes? Different kind of glamour?
No one is glamorous shooting in New York on a Friday night in February. It just doesn't happen.
Oh God.
It doesn't happen.
So how, something I also wanted to ask you was, you know, when you're doing an episodic show like The Americans, let's say, characters obviously evolve over time. If we look at any TV series, you know, you'll see an evolution. If you were to just look at photographs of a certain character from, let's say, season 1 to season 3 to season 6, you'll see that, you know, there are differences in their appearance. I guess my question would be, how does the evolution of a character, like how does the writer, the actor, and the costume designer kind of collaborate on, you know, the character went through X, Y, and Z in her journey, and that equals blank. Mm-hmm. Is that a collaboration between the three?
It is for me, because as I mentioned early on, for me, the text says everything. And if you've gotten to a later season, if you've been lucky enough to make it past your first season, right, and you get a second season, then does the second season pick up immediately where the first one left off, or has time passed? One of the things that I always say is look in your own closet. We all have pieces that we love, that work for us, that are timeless, or maybe they're not, they're dated, but we love them and we keep wearing them. And so just because it's a new year doesn't mean that we completely redo our closets every year. A good pair of black pants for men or women is going to stay in your closet as long as you can wear them and they're not threadbare. So there are pieces that I feel like travel through the series with everybody. And then much like we do, you're like, you know what? I need a new top, or I need some new jewelry, or different shoes, things like that to begin making the closet more modern for yourself. The thing I actually love is when there are kids on a show, because back to school shopping, you kids grow so quickly. And so it's a great time to be able to change their look. And also, if you're doing a period show, it's a great time to be able to show what time period you are in, because mom and dad are going to wear the styles that mom and dad have always loved. And yes, they may update a little bit, but it's rare that they go out and buy a whole new closet unless they're having their midlife crisis. But the kids every year are growing, and they want to look like all of their friends, and they want to look like whatever fashion star or music group is in at that point. And so kids are a really great way to show time and place for a TV show or a film.
Excellent. We all need to watch for that the next time we see a show with a back to school scene.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned looking at our own closets, and I'm curious to know from you, you know, I'm sure you've been asked this before, how is fashion different than costume? Or is there a difference?
Yeah. No, for me, there definitely is. Costume is about my seeing these people as written on the page and being fleshed out real humans, and I need to figure out what they wear. And sometimes they are very fashionable, and sometimes they do wear very high levels. Sorry if you can hear stuff in the background.
You're doing a back to school scene in the other room.
Yeah, exactly.
The extras are out of hand.
Yeah, they're slightly unruly sometimes. But sometimes you go and and you can see these things. I'm sorry, I totally got I got off track because of the back to school
okay.
thing.
We're at home. We can do anything, right?
We're here. Yes, everybody, enjoy. So I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Costume and fashion.
Costume and fashion, yes. So you have characters who are very different and who sometimes their wardrobes are fashiony. They do like labels. They do read fashion magazines. But that is something that is intrinsic to the personality of the character as written. And it's my job as the costume designer to figure out who that is. Fashion design, you read all of these things about fantastic designers who create their own worlds for each collection. And so they understand, like, this is the person who would wear this. This is the type of world I'm creating. This is the scene where this all takes place. And so to me, they have a much more difficult job because they're creating their entire world. And I have my world already created. I just have to find it.
Got it. Okay, wonderful answer. Thank you for that. Did you have some visuals that you wanted to share with us today?
Sure. I have a couple of things. As you mentioned, I've done a wide variety of different things, and Mitch is on it. Mitch has got the
excellent
this stuff started. So
thank you.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Yep, that's me. So from the Americans, this is Philip and Elizabeth from season 5. And these were two characters that were disguises for them that were long running. They went through the whole season. And as you asked earlier, David, about if there are any that I know just immediately, Brad Eckert, who was the pilot, is someone I knew immediately because my dad was a pilot in the 80s. Wow. And so there were so many things that immediately I was like, oh, he has to have this. This is how many shirts he packs. These are like, it was my childhood. I know exactly who that is. I know what that look is. And then there were some really great things that were written in, thanks to our amazing writing team on The Americans, about Dee's wardrobe. There's one scene where she was talking. She was like, this uniform's so tight, I can't I can't eat anything else, or I won't fit when I go for my trip. And so I was like, okay, noted, overfitted uniform, right. There are things that the script gives you and you're able to really use and latch onto about, especially the disguises for The Americans.
For those that are less familiar with this show, would you just give us a quick synopsis of the premise of it?
Sure. You have Philip and Elizabeth Jennings, who are Russian spies in 80s America, posing as Americans, doing really awful things, but you love them and you root for them nonetheless.
Excellent. Excellent. So in approaching something like this, Katie, were you going for, I guess my question would be, how good were they at blending in?
They were excellent, as we know, because the show went on for 6 seasons.
Right.
So they didn't get caught for a while. So we knew that they were really good. And it was interesting, though, because there were times where we would see their facade start to crumble, or we'd see them need to change themselves quickly to be at least less recognizable. And so that was a really fun dynamic to work with. But these characters of Dee and Brad Eckert were completely fleshed out. They had another house, they had a fake son, they did like all things, and it was living another life. And so this was something that really was realized and fully fleshed out. And they had their own closets of casual clothes as the Eckerts, as well as their flight uniforms.
Wow, excellent. These boards are beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I came to costume design pretty late. And so I did not have any kind of art classes until I was a junior in college, other than what I'd had in elementary school. And when I started doing costume design, I figured out that collaging was a really fast way for me to make my ideas able to be seen quickly and clearly on paper. And so I do still sketch, as you can see in this Brenda Neal thing. But my sketches are very functional. It's more about a flat drawing, usually for building something, or if I really just cannot find the look that I want, I will sketch it out. But they're not going to be any kind of beautiful renderings that you're going to hang on your wall, like a Greg Barnes or a Martin Pakladinas or any of those wonderful artists.
I guess I'm just going to sidebar for 1 second on that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what you would show in a first meeting to the director, to say this is the direction I'm thinking of, and you would explain it in detail.
Right. There are a lot of meetings that go into being a costume designer and putting together a TV show. And one of them is a costume meeting, which is where we go through a script page by page and talk about each character and each scene and see if there are anything specific that I have a question about, or that the director wants me to know about that scene, or what he or she wants to achieve in that scene that I can help with visually. And I learned early on that sometimes saying something, just using words, to me, didn't necessarily bring up the same visual to my directors. For example, if I say a woman in a black shirt and jeans, it's like, okay, well, is the black shirt and jeans an Old Navy black shirt and jeans? Is it a black shirt that she bought from Bloomingdale's with a pair of designer jeans? Or is it a black t-shirt that was on the floor that was her boyfriend's that she's wearing with a pair of Levi's 501s? These are three very different women, but they're all can be described as a black shirt and jeans.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
So for me, it's much easier to have a conversation if we're all looking and have the same visuals.
Wonderful. Wonderful. These are lovely. These are really lovely.
Thank you.
You can just see the whole world of the character right there.
Brenda was a favorite. Speaking of uniforms, which also always seems to be fun, this was something from the final episode of The Americans where Philip stops at a McDonald's. And it was an interesting case study for us because obviously we had to get McDonald's approval in order to do this. And it was very late in coming because these things always take a million lawyers, I'm sure, to figure out. So we started doing research on what the uniform was in 1987 for McDonald's. Well, in 1987, McDonald's had different regional uniforms. So luckily we knew which way the Jennings were going, and we knew where in the US they were meant to be. But then it becomes up to each franchise owner as to how often they've updated the uniforms. So the top board that you see were all uniforms that we had picture proof, either through commercials or through people's photos. Sidebar, thank you all for putting your personal photos online. I use them all the time for research. But you know, like the great woman in the blue uniform, that was her first day of work for her first job in 1986. Wow. And so there were things that we could find. So all of the uniforms on top were uniforms that could have been used for this McDonald's. And then we went and we talked through with the producers and the director and the showrunners which one they thought they liked best and they thought was the most plausible, and we chose the bottom one. We had no access to any kind of McDonald's archives, so this was all kind of YouTube scoping out of commercials from the time and things like that. And then we actually had to have the shirts printed and made so that way we could have this correct striping, and had to have samples sent to McDonald's corporate so they could sign off on it. So this scene maybe is 5 seconds in the entire show, but it took a huge amount of time and effort of research and of fabrication to create this. But it was really important to me because if you were alive in this time, you would know if it didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, like, as you said, you're a storyteller. So if you're not helping to tell the story, quote unquote, correctly or in a way that we remember it, you know, I know as a viewer myself, sometimes we kind of we go, wait a minute, that's not right. And it takes us out of the scene, actually. And it kind of does the opposite.
Right. And it's sometimes you can't even put your finger on it. You wouldn't even know, like, oh, the uniform's off. But to me, I wanted him to be able to walk into the McDonald's, and everybody who had been in a McDonald's in 1987 was like, oh, yeah, okay. And just kind of be there with the story. Mm-hmm. These are some photos and a board from the NBC show The Enemy Within that I did, starring Morris Chestnut. I don't just do research boards for period pieces. I do them on all of my shows for each character. I do have a rule that if your character has a name, you get a board. If your character does not have a name, then you don't always get a board. Sometimes you do, but you don't always. But so again, it's the same thing we were talking about, where I can say a man in a suit. Well, what kind of suit? You know, there are a lot of different types of suits. How well does the suit fit? What color palette? All of these kind of things, and making sure that we're all on the same page visually. So this is the board that I presented first when we started working with Morris and with the producers and showrunners.
Wonderful, wonderful.
All right.
Has a producer ever looked at one of these boards and said, yes, I want that exact look?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you go, oh gosh, now I have to find it. Like,
yeah, no, it's happened to me a couple of times where I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have put that I didn't, or it surprises you and you're like, I didn't realize they were going to love that thing so much. Like, okay.
It's something like from last season that sold out and you just can't, yeah.
In which case you say, if you really want it, we can fabricate it, we can build it, but here's what the cost is going to be. So we can either do that, or all the boring stuff. You're like, or you can take a look at these other items that could work just as well.
Right.
These are 3 of the women whom I outfitted for season 10 of America's Got Talent. And it was such a fun show because you just got to do things that looked cool. They were just, you know, the producers would come to you, like the top right, and they would say, like, she's a Tsarina in an ice castle. And you're like, okay, great. Let's all have a Julie Christie moment and have fur hats on the violinists, and fantastic, no problem, let's do it. And it was very freeing because the producers for each act would come to us and say, this is what we want. And we're like, great, let's do it. And then you'd go out and do it, hopefully pretty quickly.
And so different than what you described your work on television was.
It was very different.
Excuse me, episodic television.
Episodic television. America's Got Talent was kind of the first thing that began to bridge my work from theater into my work into episodic television. The designers for America's Got Talent, Stephen Lee and Daniela Schwentner, are amazing, fantastic humans. And they brought me on for an earlier season, largely because I had done theater and I understood quick changes and I understood the need of how to work fast and in this scale, because we did shoot in front of a live audience. And so you wanted the costumes to look good on camera, but they also needed to look good on stage. And so they brought me on as an assistant designer. Again, we had a very large team. And then in season 10, they are also the designers for Dancing with the Stars. And at this particular season, the way it overlapped, they both had to go to start Dancing of the Stars. So I had been working with them up until this point, all that season. And then for the last 2 episodes, they were with Dancing with the Stars. And so we were doing this and sending it back to them for approval and working remotely that way.
And here's something rather different.
And here is Super Why Live, which was a touring kids show based on the PBS show Super Why. And this was kind of theater and fun, but also in it's, you know, a touring show. So there are a lot of logistical things with touring as far as how many costumes each person has, how big they are to get stored, can they break down, how quickly you load in, and you're dealing with a different crew in every single city about who is dressing people. I had my core, my, you know, my wardrobe supervisor traveled, and she had an assistant. But the other people were all very different. And so the costumes needed to be very user-friendly for a brand new person to be doing this kind of every night or every 2 nights. And so these were just some very, it was a very fun and kind of very different project for me, creating these cartoon characters on stage.
Very fun.
Dance. I love dance. I danced as a younger person and have always had a great respect and love for it. And so I did a lot of dance work early in my career. These 2 pieces were for an Israeli choreographer named Zvi Gathiner, who was in New York. And these were 2 world premieres that we did together.
And so the upper left, the illustrations there, is that what you brought to the choreographer at the beginning to say, this is what I'm thinking?
That is. And there were easily like 10 of these, which I think you can tell I had photocopied the bodies and just kind of quickly sketched onto them, because we were talking about color. And as you can see, it's a bare stage. So the palette was kind of ours to create, and working with the lighting designer, but there was a black backdrop and a black floor. So there wasn't any other color that I was working either with or against. So I had just pages of these, and I sat with him and kind of went through and quickly sketched and said, like, here's an idea, this is the one that stuck.
In designing for dance, is there a lot of like testing of how things move, like in a rehearsal and so on?
Absolutely. The clothes come in much earlier in dance than they do in theater. And also, it's very important for me to watch rehearsals early on to see what kind of movement the choreographer is using, but also to have the conversation about, does the costume flow with the movement, or should it be something that the dancer is fighting against, which a lot of modern pieces, they want you to be external forces that they're fighting against. And costume can be one of those.
Oh, interesting.
And also opera. Again, this was Faust, which I did 10 years ago for Opera Memphis. And so this was a case where I sketched everything out. I had research attached to sketches, and I also had fabric attached to sketches. I was living in New York and doing my sketches here and shopping the fabrics here, and then sending photocopies basically via email to the director and the producer in Memphis for approval, and saying, so, you know, it'll look like this ideally, and working remotely. And so I was trying to have it be as clear as possible for everyone looking as to what the idea was, and also, you know, have an idea of how it was all pulled together, but also be able to see the fabrics and how that would all work.
And is this Faust that we're looking, who are we looking at the top?
Sorry, at the top, you're looking at Mephistopheles.
Ah, okay.
We did a steampunk Faust. It was 2010. And so we, you know, the idea of toying with the devil and everything. And we always were seeing Faust kind of working on things. And so it became very mechanized. And so for the devil, I wanted him to be this kind of very pulled together Victorian style gentleman, but with elements that were much more dangerous or kind of held together. So we had all of the cogs kind of holding things together. I know you can't see it, but the buttons on his vest are actually pieces of a clock that goes straight down, that were all very different. And it was actually while working on this piece that it really kind of became clear to me that I love, I love the buttons that are different pieces of a clock, which you will see in film and television, but you won't see past the fourth row of an opera house. So it became really clear to me that the scale that I liked to work in is one where the audience is going to be able to see those smaller details.
So this was a very important show for you to do.
It
to
was.
discover this.
Yes, it absolutely
or
was.
at least put words to it.
Yeah.
Wonderful, beautiful designs.
Thank you. And
Excellent.
if you're interested, that's where you can see more of it.
You can hear me, yes?
I can hear you now, yes.
Sorry. There, when the screen changes, it's for a moment. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. I just want to let our fabulous audience or participants know that in just a few minutes, you'll be able to ask your own questions to Katie. So if you want to go ahead and write any of them in chat, please do. Katie, thank you so much. The pieces you showed us are so beautiful, and what a great range of work. And to be able to say, I've done opera, I've done dance, I've done, my God, your theater resume is so darn long and so accomplished. And then to go to television and to film at such high level projects. I mean, it's really incredible. And it's wonderful to see you master all of those mediums so well.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
You touched earlier on a word called budget. So when you're working on any project, be it an opera, be it a play, a dance piece, a movie, a television series, obviously there is a budget involved. And does that budget dictate choices that you make? Does it dictate whether you take the job or not? Does it dictate maybe a conversation with a producer or director, etc.? How is that sort of like how would I say, like a partner to your process?
Yes and no. For me, the scripts are always the thing that are amazing. If it's a good story, I want to be a part of it. I love telling stories, and I think it's very important to tell stories, especially stories that we haven't seen before from people we haven't seen before. And so, but budget is very important because of how we're going to tell the stories. So the biggest thing to me is just making sure that the budget numbers that the people who are providing the money have in mind align with the way that they want to tell the story. So for example, if someone comes to me and says, you have $1,200 to do this, but it's two people and they're only in their kitchen the whole time and it takes place over the course of 36 hours, sure, we can figure it, that's not a problem, we can do that. If it's $1,200 and there's a chorus of dancing frogs, then we're going to have a problem and I'm not going to be able to do that. And we need to talk about how you're seeing this. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily a no, but it's just, I want to make sure that whatever the budget, the finished product looks exactly like we want it to look.
Excellent, excellent. I know we have questions, and I'm going to.
I was going to say, I see it flashing.
But while I have you, I want to ask a few more.
Sure.
Do you have a dream project?
Oh God, not specifically in mind. No, for my master's degree at NYU, I did Pacific Overtures, the Stephen Sondheim musical. And it was only a paper project. I did all of the sketches and I budgeted it and did all of that, but it was never realized. And so that is kind of one that is lurking in the background that I'm still definitely interested in. Okay. But again, to me, a good story worth telling is the next project I want to do.
Excellent, excellent. All right, let's go and see what questions we might have. Um, well, Nadine says that collage is one of her favorite things. So you
Thanks,
have a
Nadine.
collaging fan. Um, so Deborah asks, she'd love to hear you speak about color and how it informs your work.
Sure. Color is very useful in making your characters pop or blend into their surroundings. So very early on in a prep period for the television series that you're working on, we would have a meeting with the director of photography, the showrunners, and the production designer and myself, and we would talk about a color palette. And sometimes it's a very tight color palette. Sometimes it's a very large color palette, and people, audience members, would be much harder pressed to be able to tell that there is one even. But we begin to talk about that. And so then once I know that the world that my production designer is working within and how the DP is going to shoot it, whether it's going to be darker or whether they're going to use a lot of light, if they're going to use natural light or they're planning on using a lot of lamps around, that then begins to tell me how much I can play with color. If I can do really subtle color changes over the course of something, or if it needs to be bolder. And also, you know, characters, two characters who are on opposite sides of something, but who ultimately figure something out, I may want to be in complementary colors. So they look very different, but they work together. Again, it's looking at each scene at what is right for the character and then their world.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Grace asks, how did you get into costuming? And have you always been interested in it?
In a very roundabout way is the answer, Grace. I started doing theater in 6th grade, but I went to an all-girls school, and you know, we all played all the roles, and we had a director, but there wasn't a costume designer, there wasn't a lighting designer, there were not all of these roles as I now know to be defined. And so I knew that I liked theater, but I had no idea that a costume designer was really a thing. And when I started looking at colleges, I was very interested in medicine, and I thought I would be pre-med. I was interested in being a research biologist, actually. And so my parents had very kindly told me that if I looked at colleges that were able to provide me financial assistance to go to them, they would then be able to help me with postgraduate work later, meaning, you know, med school, hopefully. And so I took them at their word, and I began to look for places that had good science and biology departments, but also that had good theater, because I enjoyed doing that. And I ended up at the University of Tulsa, which had an excellent biology department, but also had a really phenomenal theater department that had also given me a partial scholarship. And so I went there and I did 1 semester of biology and decided that that was not, in fact, what I wanted to be doing with my life, and began working in the costume shop at the University of Tulsa under a phenomenal woman named Eileen Hicks, who was a mentor to me then and is a mentor to me now, and a very dear friend, and began working and doing more theater there. I then went through, and it was a Bachelor of Arts program, not a BFA. So we all had to do everything. And I was taking all the different courses. I stage managed, I directed. I was not good at either of those. I did set design and have a very high level of respect to people who can use a scale rule. But then the first semester of my junior year, I took my costume design course. And I really had kind of a eureka moment where I was like, this is what I want to do. I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but this is what I want to do. And so over the course of the next year and a half, I crammed in as much costume history, costume design, drawing courses as I could. And then through being at the right place at the right time, Island took a position at another university. And so the University of Tulsa was looking for someone for an interim of 1 year to run the costume shop, to design all of the main stage shows and the black box shows, and to teach a basic, cutting and draping, or a sewing and draping course. And lucky for them, they had someone who had just graduated who was doing all of that. So I had this really great hybrid of 1 year where it was a professional job and I was building my resume and designing shows, but it was still within the confines and comfort of academia. And after that, I went to NYU and did my master's degree there and just kind of started along that road.
Grace, I don't know if that's not the answer I expected.
Everyone comes to it differently is the short answer.
It's a fabulous story. Thank you for sharing that. Elif wants to know what your favorite era is.
Oh, the one I'm designing at that time? I know it sounds like a cop-out, but I really mean it. And my husband would actually tell you, it's really funny. He can tell when I've been working on a show long enough because my own fashion choices start to gear towards
that. Start to shift in that area.
After 6 seasons on The Americans, I was actually contemplating shoulder pads. And my husband was like, "Are you kidding?" And I was like, "Oh, but they do such good things." Like, so it really is, it's about having, it does, it takes over, and it's about having such a love of what you're designing and an understanding of it.
Excellent. All right, so she doesn't have one. That's a great answer. Polly has a very practical question.
Great.
What happens to all of the clothes after a show ends?
You're not going to like the answer. They're often all put into cardboard boxes to go sit in a storage facility for somewhere, is oftentimes what happens. And then they sit there and sit there and sit there. In a better case scenario, the network takes them and they go into their own costume studios, so you can use those pieces across other shows. So for example, on the NBC show, NBC has a warehouse. So after The Enemy Within wrapped, all of the clothes that they wanted went to that warehouse. And now other shows can come and, take out the suits and things like that. But like when we wrapped The Americans, there was an archivist that came from FX, and they took, I believe, 12 pieces. And then there was an online sale of some of the costumes, and then the rest kind of got sold or donated to other shows or things. School uniforms, we donated to some schools here in New York. The same with the hockey equipment, we donated to some leagues here in New York. But oftentimes they just kind of get scattered to the wind.
Lisa would like to hear more about resources that you use to research historic costume.
I have a great library that kind of travels with me for each show that I do. That is a broad range of books across various periods. And I've had to stop myself from buying any books that are not pertinent to what I'm currently working on because I just don't have a place to house them right now. But I always love starting with books because I don't always know exactly what I'm looking for. And so being able to flip a page and say, oh, I didn't realize this is what I needed, but this is obviously what I need, is something that's really exciting to me. Magazines, especially, the same thing. And again, it's not necessarily just for period. If I know that I am doing something modern, it's, you know, I'm like, okay, great. Who is the teen? Are they reading YM? Are they reading Cosmo? What, you know, what are they looking at? I love school yearbooks. Going back to kids, I love yearbooks for how kids are wearing clothes, because we all know about Sears catalogs and those kind of fantastic tools, but that shows you how the advertiser or the manufacturer wants the clothes to be worn. I want to see how they're actually being worn. What are the kids actually doing to their Converse? How are they actually wearing the sweatshirts? Are they cutting the necks out? What, you know, what's happening to these things? As I said earlier, I love all of these people that post their own photos online. Pinterest, Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook feeds, all, if you've posted it online, I will find it and I will go and use it.
Use it, yes.
And use it, yes. Yeah, no, it's great. It's seeing real people and how they choose to mix and match and wear things in really creative and inventive ways.
So I have a question from Cedar, who asks, if you want a character to look very feminine, what are your go-to tactics?
Feminine for me comes almost exclusively from the actor, not necessarily from what I put them in. Because I can put someone in a very frilly blouse and a skirt and high heels or anything else that, you know, we as a society could say is feminine. But if the actor is not comfortable in those things, if she is more comfortable in a man's shirt and, you know, a pair of boxer shorts, then that is going to be something that she is going to be able to work more towards. And then on the flip side, if you mean a man who is wanting to be feminine, again, for me, that's the actor. It's what is he thinking is his ideal about being feminine? Is it cheekbones? Does he have amazing facial structure? And so then maybe it's, you know, a collar that comes up that frames his face and can accentuate that. Does he have great legs? It's a mini skirt. So it really would absolutely, for me, start with a conversation with the actor who really needs to be feminine and talk about what is the word, what do they want to accentuate, and how do they think they can physically do it and portray this, and what can I do to help that?
You are so good at what you do. You really are. You're amazing.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
So I think I'm just going to ask you two more things. How would you describe your style as a designer? Like if someone were to describe your work, they would say Katie Irish's work is
a realist. One of the things that I kind of pride myself on is if I'm doing a show about FBI agents, they're wearing suits that FBI agents would wear. They're shopping on an FBI budget. And so sometimes, obviously, it's television, so we fudge it a little bit. But if that is the case, then I'm not usually going to be custom making suits for anybody, because on an FBI budget, that isn't something that they would have. And so if it's something that needs to be custom, then to me, I want it to either, it's because I can't find it anywhere and we're building it, but then I'll break it down to look like it's been in their closet for a long time. Or it's something that this person would be able to afford to have shirts made for themselves. And that's something that they want and would do. And so for me, I really like to look at the character and go back to the text and see, who is this person? Where does he or she shop? What is their budget? I used to email the Jays, who were the showrunners, Joe and Joel, on The Americans, because we would have all of these little disguises, and they were in one scene, they were tossaways, but I'd be like, what does she do? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, okay, well, I know that she's standing smoking a cigarette next to the newspaper kiosk, but who is she? And they're like, single mom, works at a diner. I'm like, great, thank you. That's all I need to know. Like, just tell me who this person is. And so I can begin to understand who that person is and where they shop. So I like for my work to be real, which is not to say it's not fashiony sometimes, but again, it's something that you look at and you're like, yeah, I know who that person is.
Wonderful. Katie, you have a project coming up, yes?
Hope, fingers crossed, hopefully, yes.
Can you
We're
tell
kind
us
of in the middle
anything
of it.
about that?
It is a new series for Netflix. We shot half of it in New York this fall. We were in the process of shooting the other half in Tel Aviv when this virus became a pandemic. And so we're all home now. But it is, I don't know how much more I'm actually allowed to say.
Okay, all right.
I don't want
But
to
we can follow you, right? And
You
find
can
out.
follow me, and as soon as there is more to say, I absolutely will be shouting it from the rooftops because I'm very, very proud of the work that we've all done so far.
How can our audience today follow you?
I am online. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram at KN, as in Noel, Irish. And that's probably the best way to follow me.
Excellent, excellent. And my last question today is, for someone interested in stepping into your field, what might be the first step?
The first step is really being a PA, which is a production assistant. This is where you really begin to learn how film production and TV production work. You learn the hierarchies, you learn how the schedules work, you learn kind of the inner workings of all of the departments. And if you know that you want to work in the costume department, then by all means, try, be a PA in a costume department. I do have to say it is hateful. It's not fun always. There are a lot of returns. There's a lot of taking really heavy costume bags back and forth in snowstorms.
There's always a snowstorm, yes?
There's always, except this year, but there's always a snowstorm. And it's a lot of really not glamorous physical labor of carrying things and trying to get things from one place to another and logistics. But it does allow you to see how everything works. And also, one of the things that I love is I always try and ask my PAs what they're interested in. Are they interested in working on the costume side or the wardrobe side? Do they want to be a designer themselves, or are they more interested in being on set and being a costumer? And so I always try and give my PAs access to that. So if someone wants to be a costume designer, I do try and have them come to a meeting with me at some point, or to come into fittings, or to be part of the shopping that comes in, to see how things are working, because we don't really have a great apprentice program now. And it's one of those things that I feel very strongly that I was able to learn through some great designers, and I would like other people to be able to as well.
Wonderful. Katie, I am so grateful to have this time with you. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today.
Thank you guys
we
so
have
much.
another Knack at Home event with a fashion theme this coming Tuesday with the creators of American Duchess, a chat on 18th century fashion and style. I'm very excited about that, so please join us for that. Again, the National Arts Club, these at-home chats are going to be available, are listed rather, on the National Arts Club website. And I thank you for joining us today. Katie Irish, you are absolutely ridiculously talented and wonderful and eloquent and everything. You're it. You are just it. Thank you so much for doing this today and joining us and being part of the National Arts Club. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for your interest. Bye, guys.